Welcome back to Radio Entrepreneurs. I'm Jonathan Freedman. Our next guest up needs no introduction. Tom McNulty, Lando Anastasi. Great to see you again.
Oh, likewise. Thanks for having me again.
So always timely and topical, Tom. You wanted to talk about the president's executive order last month, and I think in the midst of everything else going on, probably not too many people digested it all that much. So why don't you let us know what some of the important provisions in there are?
Okay. Well, on July 9th, President Biden signed an executive order dealing with competition in the American economy. It covered a host of different things. A lot of it was industry specific. Pharmaceuticals, farming industry were both touched on considerably. But the one I'd like to talk about is one of the initiatives is an encouragement for the FTC to place limits on non-competition clauses, which, you know, if you're an entrepreneurial business that's trying to protect your confidential information, your trade secrets, things like that may be of concern.
Which is quite commonplace in most technology companies, and many other industries have tried to implement it as well. And I know we don't have to get too deeply into it, but I know Massachusetts has its own guidance with regards to non-compete agreements. So it's a complicated area.
It is a complicated area. As it stands right now, all but 3 states allow some form of non-competition agreement. The 3 states that don't are California, North Dakota, and Oklahoma. So it's not sort of, you know, a left or a right coalition that seems to be moving in that direction. It's a pretty diverse set of states. Of the remaining 47 states, 24 have some sort of statutory restrictions on non-competes with employees, and a number of those that don't have statutory restrictions have bills that are, you know, under consideration right now. So it's a little bit unclear whether the FTC should really be doing anything or whether now is the time, since it seems like there's a growing trend towards at least putting limitations on what you can do with non-compete agreements.
So what was the thinking behind the executive order? I mean, not that any of us can get into their heads, but is it sort of trying to level the playing field with industry and employees? Is that the intent?
I think that's the intent. There's some discussion in the background paperwork that the White House released along with this that says that their survey evidence and their sort of investigation into this says that roughly half of all private sector businesses require non-compete agreements for at least some of their employees, and that 32% of private businesses require all employees to sign one, which is that frankly would be a bigger number than I would have guessed. And they I don't know, they did some sort of calculation, determined that meant that somewhere between 28 and 47% of all private sector employees are subject to a non-compete.
So really far-reaching, and you know, in all likelihood, if you're not bound by one, you know somebody that probably is.
Yeah, and you know, they did a similar kind of survey back in 2014 that came up with an 18% coverage number. So at least their analysis suggests that the numbers are growing. I'm not sure that everyone in the country would agree with that, but that's the White House's position. I have seen some analyses that say that there hasn't really been a change of any significant amount in at least the enforcement efforts of non-competes appearing in court, whatever that, you know, may actually tell you.
Sometimes the paper alone is worth more than the ability to enforce it. You know, the threat of having the paper, I guess, signed.
One of the interesting things about that actually is, even though non-competes are banned in California, according to this, you know, the White House's analysis, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40% of all California private sector employees have signed and are covered by one, even though it's enforceable in court.
Now, is that a retroactive issue, or how long has it been that they've been non-enforceable in California? Has that been a considerable period of time?
It has been, I mean, it certainly is possible that some of these people are, and I'll be honest, I don't know if California grandfathered them in or if you had signed one after the law passed, if it went away. I kind of think it's the latter. California takes employer mobility very seriously.
It's interesting considering, you know, from a tech sector perspective, you know, obviously left coast and the East Coast have, you know, strong hotbeds, and you would think that would open up the talent pool on the West Coast more by people not feeling as though they're going to be bound by these things.
Yeah, and there's been some suggestion that that's kind of one of the reasons that a significant portion of the tech industry left the 128 loop and ended up in California back in the day. Again, whether that's true or not is a difficult thing to prove, but that link has been noted.
Absolutely. So what does the executive order, specifically tell us that it's guiding in terms of non-competes, and what does it bring for employers and employees alike to think about?
Well, this is one of the problems with the executive order. Is the full language with respect to non-competes is that they are encouraging the FTC to consider using its rulemaking authority to, quote, curtail the unfair use of non-compete clauses and other clauses or agreements that may unfairly limit worker mobility. That's it. There's no further guidance. Wow. Okay. So it's sort of hard to say. I know like I say, in some of the papers that accompanied this, one of the concerns was mandatory arbitration clauses. So I suspect at a minimum, that would be something that the FTC would look at. But whether it's, whether the FTC chooses to, A, do anything, and B, curtail them completely or place limits on them is still up in the air. Non-competes have a lot of legitimate reasons for existing, protecting your trade secrets and your confidential information and your business's goodwill and things like that. So I would certainly hope that this wouldn't lead to an outright ban on non-competes.
Is this one of these situations? And again, it seems as though, obviously in your business, this is front and center, but to the average American, it probably didn't hit their radar as one of the provisions in this executive order. But I'm wondering, will you or have you started to see an uptick in terms of, some of your clients saying, yeah, I've got this guy who's now hemming and hawing and signing a non-compete because he heard there's an executive order that he doesn't have to. So, I think that's the fear of how it plays out, right?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit under the radar right now. It is the middle of summer. I don't know how much attention people are paying to these kind of political events. And like I say, it's just a request that the FTC take a look at the issue. So it's not a definitive, it's not definitive that a change is actually going to happen. But I do think it's important for people to start looking at perhaps other ways of dealing with protection of their information and protection of their goodwill than solely through non-compete agreements. Excuse me. You can use things like non-disclosure agreements, non-solicitation agreements to prevent your ex-employees from contacting your customers, so they could go into a competing business. They just couldn't directly interact with people that they had interacted with, when they were with you. I think it's probably. And
I think that restriction makes a lot of sense. I think what we're trying to do is protect people from stealing or using my information that's proprietary. I think the other side of the coin is sort of, well, how can you preclude somebody from making a living in what they know how to do? And I think that's obviously the reason why we're trying to make non-competes less restrictive. But by the same token, still protecting proprietary information and customer data.
And there's got to be some balance struck. Like I say, there are these other types of agreements that you can strike with employees. I will say that the order does suggest that they look at non-compete clauses and other clauses or agreements that may unfairly limit worker mobility. So it's not a given that these kinds of things aren't going to be looked at as well. So with respect to these other types of agreements, if you look at what the states have done with non-competes, I think one of the important things would be to make sure that employees are notified in advance, get a chance to look at the agreements in advance to signing on, consult with an attorney, try to make the existence of and to the extent that it's negotiable, the negotiation of these agreements as open and fair and transparent as possible, because that's one of the areas that the non-competes were really being looked at with great scrutiny was, having an employer show up on the first day of work and dropping it on his lap. And, what's he going to do then?
You're here. You've already left your other position, and I'd like it signed before lunch, please, today.
Yeah.
Type of thing.
And then another good step, I think, is to notify, to the extent you can find out this information. If you've got an employee that's leaving and going to a new place, notify the new place of the existence of these agreements. And it's sort of twofold. One, I think, the majority of, I'd like to think anyways, the majority of businesses are interested in competing fairly and aren't looking to steal your information, and that will put them kind of on notice to really kind of tiptoe around the subject and make sure they don't do it. And to the extent that it's somebody unscrupulous, it gives you a potential claim of tortious interference with contractual relations against the business themselves. So it puts them on the line and not just the ex-employee.
Excellent. Well, great guidance, great advice, always timely and topical, as I mentioned. Tom, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
You can always find me at TMCNULTY, T McNulty at LAlaw.com.
Excellent. Tom McNulty, partner Lando Anastasi. Always a pleasure to have you, Radio Entrepreneurs.
And I always enjoy being here.
Excellent. And we'll be right back with another segment on Radio Entrepreneurs.